Hi, everyone. Welcome to We Didn't Turn Out Okay. Today, I have on Allison Mell, pediatric physical therapist and founder of her platform on social and more called Tots on Target.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really so excited to be here. And as you said, I am a pediatric physical therapist. I have been working with kids for forever, starting from when I was a kid. I always loved working with kids. And then I found myself in the physical therapy world and always focused on pediatrics. And so I have worked with everybody from newborns through 10-year-olds. And then I went into the world of Tots on Target, where I branched out onto social media, educating parents literally all over the world about child development.
I'm sure we'll get into all the other things that you do to support them. Since we're on my podcast called We Didn't Turn Out Okay, which I really want to add a ... at the end of that title, I keep meaning to. I'd love to ask you if you feel like there were parts of you, whether it be pre-motherhood or motherhood, that sort of led you to where you are right now. Of course, I want to get into all of the pediatric PT knowledge, but just as a starting point, anything that you could think of that sort of led you to where you are today?
Sure. I've been a mom now for 14 plus years. I have twin 14-year-olds, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And when I look back to where I started my parenting journey, I really think, and I'm like, if I had all the information then that I have today and the confidence as a mom that I have today, I think of so many points where I would have done it differently. Now, we could all say that about every situation,
totally.
Right? That's 100% true. But I do think now, being an experienced mom and working in the pediatric world, so I work with parents all the time, is that knowledge brings you so much confidence, so much more the ability to advocate for your children. And I think that that is such a key thing that parents, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what questions to ask. And so when I'm on my platforms and I can educate parents, it gives them the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to ask the right questions so that they can better advocate for their children.
I love that so much. As you're talking, I'm thinking so much about how that's so true, right? Half of, or like you'd argue, like 99% of what feels so scary when we first become parents is that we haven't experienced it yet, for the first time. And with experience comes more confidence. And so I'm even thinking back to, I worked with infants and toddlers for so long before I became a parent. And so I felt really like equipped and knowledgeable, but I had never been a parent myself before. And so even with that, since I'm always talking about where I didn't turn out okay, I realized as you were talking that even with that, I still had a hard time advocating, I guess, or just giving into, I should seek out someone, a doctor, a specialist, or something like that. Because there's really no downside, which I've learned with the experience of becoming a parent. But in the beginning, even in moms groups, when people would be worried about things, I wasn't like downplaying it, but I often would try to quell their nerves, almost as if I was like projecting like, my own quelling that I would do for myself. How do you feel about that? Do you ever feel like there's a downside to seeking out someone like you? Like if, it's something as little, seemingly little as my infant isn't rolling over yet.
Yeah.
Like, what is the downside to seeking out support?
That's a really good question, because I think a lot of parents are like, well, if I need to go to an expert or specialist, it means there's something wrong with my child.
Right.
Like that's your first
We feel like
instinct.
We're like giving into that.
Yeah, it's like, well, I don't want to, I hear from parents all the time, I don't want to overanalyze. I don't want to be that worrying mom, right? It's like that stigma of like, I don't want to be that worried mom who's like always trying to, delve into something that's not really there, right? I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And the thing is, there are times that we can totally have that like, let's wait and see approach. But your question is so important, which is, what is the downside of
That's
going
what's
to the
helped
specialist?
me.
And you're 100% wrong, right? You're 100% right. You are not wrong.
Can also tell
there were
me.
two sentences in my brain at the same time. You're 100% right, which is there is no downside in going for that support. And I tell parents, if there is something in you that says there's something not right, or I have more questions, then you have every right yourself to find out the answer. And if that is the first stop is the pediatrician and that's where you get that answer, great. And if you're like, something's not sitting right, I need to go further, then that's also totally 100% okay.
Yeah, I want to like just let that land a little bit, because I think you're so right that we feel, and even as a resource or an expert in the field, like when a parent would come to me, if I were to respond and be like, there's no downside to going to a PT and just, making sure or something like that. I think the fear is that, oh, this person, I don't want anyone to think I'm like telling them to go.
Yeah.
But I think framing it as there's no downside, it will give you peace of mind or help you get the support if it's something that like the earlier the better.
Yeah.
Things like that, which I've learned, even when nobody has told me, not waiting also for somebody else to be like, there's an issue here that we see in your child.
Yep.
I think there's so much there with going with even like that little itch of, I'd rather just, make sure that I have this covered type of thing.
And also something to remember is that when you take your child to a well visit at a pediatrician's office and you're going to the 2-month-old appointment and the 4-month and the 6-month, your pediatrician is seeing a snapshot of your baby. They are seeing a moment in time. That moment in time could be your baby is sleeping, your baby's crying, your baby is a star and is having the best moment that they've had, right? Any of those things can be happening in the 15 minutes that your pediatrician is actually watching your child. And you have to remember that you know your baby best. You are the one who sees your baby at the best moments, at the awake moments, at the tired moments. And so if you're seeing something consistently that may show up in the appointment and may not show up in the appointment, you're the one that actually sees the ongoing every day. And so you can trust that instinct of what I'm seeing is real. And it's something that I need to pursue if I'm worried about it.
Yes. And then on that note, let's get into a little bit of sort of what I'll call like that fine line. Because I think when it comes to PT or any specialist, there's a fine line between, of course, kids are developing cognitively, emotionally, physically, all the things from, infancy until forever. And so there is going to be a range of when they reach certain milestones or they start showing that they're reaching micro milestones to get there. What's the fine line between like that range and, seeking out some extra support there, especially like coming from your own experience? I was going to say, especially when people come to you.
Sure. So there are a few things that we have to consider about a baby's development, because there are those people that say, okay, we need to make sure that every baby's on track, right? And then there is the group that says, every baby will do things on their own time. We don't have to rush things. And it's kind of both. There's a range of normal with every milestone. So you look at the big milestones of rolling, sitting, crawling, and walking. We have rolling, that's a 4 to 6 month milestone. Sitting is a 6 to 8 month milestone. Crawling 7 to 10, and walking is 10 to 15. So there's a wide range for all of these milestones to be happening. And it's okay for our babies and our toddlers to meet those milestones anytime within that range. And so if your baby is 4 months old and not rolling, that's okay, right? And if your baby is 8.5 months old and not crawling, that's okay. But we want to make sure that they are within that range of normal. And we also want to pay attention to that progress. And so, as you said, the micro milestones or the mini stones, as some people will call them, right? Are we seeing a continuous progression? Is baby meeting the mini milestones along the way that are leading up? Because a baby is not going to just do nothing and then all of a sudden get up and crawl, right? We want to see that progression. So if we take crawling, for example, we want to see that baby is, sitting stably and reaching in all directions. Maybe they are pushing up and doing some planking. They're doing some downward dog movements. They're rocking on all fours, right? All those things have to come before a baby is going to take off crawling.
Totally.
Okay? And so if your baby is doing nothing at all at 9 months old, well, then maybe we want to take a further look, right? That crawling milestone is 7 to 10 months, but they're doing nothing at all
before that.
At 9 months old, 9.5 months. Well, okay, then when you go to that 9-month pediatrician appointment, that's a good time to say, hey, you know what? My baby's not doing anything at all, right? And you're not just waiting around for that end. But if your baby is 9 months old and is planking and is rocking on all fours but hasn't taken off yet, okay, let's give them a little bit more time because things are coming together. So it's really important to look at the progression of the skill and not just focus on that big end result. So that's a really, really big thing to focus on. The other thing is the quality of movement. We want to make sure that the quality of movements is good. The baby's using both sides of their body equally, and that they look very fluid and that they're motivated to move. Some babies are like what parents will think, lazy. They're not lazy. It's if babies are just sitting there and they're not doing anything, then that's something to also pay attention to. It's because they actually can't move, not because they don't want to.
Right. And I think it's so important, to help empower parents. It's empowering for parents to see those micro milestones so that they aren't just waiting for that. All of a sudden, one day they're crawling, and when that doesn't happen, it evokes fear.
Exactly.
I think that one telling example when we aren't empowering parents and how that can kind of get in the way is with sitting up. There's so much that comes before that, and parents don't know that often. And so they're often propping their baby up in hopes that that will like strengthen the pelvis and they'll get there. But you and I both know that to sit up, you don't crunch up. You often see babies starting to do crunches, and then we pull them up thinking that we're helping them. I'm not saying never do that, but it's really time on the floor to get to side position to then be able to push up on the side.
Yes.
Like when I tell moms that, that's the evolution of being able to sit up, they're like, oh my God. When you don't know that, you're just sitting up all the time. And they're missing those micro milestones of practice that happens naturally.
Yes.
If they're
getting into sitting is actually a complex skill, right?
From going from the floor. So people think, obviously if this isn't your background on surface level, you're like, I just need to practice. My baby needs to practice building their core and in sitting position, but they actually get stuck there.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on I firmly believe faster is not better, with the caveat that, of course, we want it to be within normal range. That's more like what I believe in, because I think when we believe faster is better, we meddle and we can actually do a disservice. What do you feel about that?
Oh, I am totally on that team 100%. And I always think about when I potty trained my kids, it's if you try to potty train, your 18-month-old because you're about to have another baby and you need to get them to do it, you are going to get into a power struggle, and you are both going to be completely miserable, and it's not going to work. It's going to backfire. When you wait for them to really be ready, it is going to click in 2 days, with an occasional accident.
Yeah.
It's literally, it takes so fast when they are actually ready, and you can't spend 6 months preparing them for that. It's when they're ready, they're ready. And I look at the milestones in very similar way with the progression of the skill, right? We have to look at milestones as they have to be developmentally ready for a skill, which is why 6-month-olds should not be walking, right? And I wouldn't even look at a 6-month-old and say they're ready to crawl yet, right? We have to make sure that we are keeping those age ranges in mind, because they need to be developmentally ready for that skill. And I get this a lot with walking, actually, because parents want their babies to walk. And there are a lot of grandparents who are like, your baby's turning 1. Why aren't they walking yet, right? And people think, well, my baby should be walking by their first birthday. And I say, hold on with that. Because while there are many babies that do walk by their first birthday, because that range is 10 to 15 months, so many babies don't. And I am in no rush. There is no any statistic that shows that an early walker is going to be a better athlete or a better math genius one day.
Can I just say I have a 16-month-old and 17-month-old walkers.
Yeah.
Well, now they're 5 and 7, but one walked at 16 months, one walked at 17.
Yes.
So.
And again, when I say 10 to 15 months, there are many that will say up to 18-month-old is totally normal.
Right.
And I say that,
but there were definitely signs within that.
We need to see the progression towards that skill, right? So that is so key in, right? Two of my kids walked at 15 months, one at 14 months, and one at 18 months. Okay. So I had no early walkers, and they are just fine. And the 15-month-old walker climbs on top of my swing sets and does gymnastics on the top of it. He's totally fine. There's no need to rush this skill. What we're looking for is the continuous progression. And the reason that we want to pay attention to these milestones is not so that you become worried, what if my baby isn't doing this skill, right? It's not because it means that something is wrong or long-term there's going to be a problem. We want to pay attention to these milestones to make sure we're not losing sight of something, and making sure that we are staying on top of things to make sure your child isn't falling further behind, or we're not catching something that could be easily fixed with a little bit of help.
Right. The earlier you catch it, the more likely that early intervention will be just a blip, or
exactly.
That you can start if it's not a blip to help get them the support.
Like if your first grader was having trouble with reading, you would get a reading tutor.
Right.
You don't say okay, well, I don't want to get a reading tutor because I don't want to acknowledge that some things are, you get a reading tutor so you can catch them up so that second grade goes easier.
Right.
You know, it doesn't mean that they're not going to do well on their SATs.
Right. And it's aligned with like, you know what I was saying, this like hesitancy to seek out that support. So instead we either wait or we try and rush them.
Yes.
And knowing that there's like resources like you and all the PTs out there, like, you know, there's just no downside to just being like, you know what, it's happening, you know, out of range. She's already older than 15 months. Like, what are some things that I can do?
Right.
And I also quickly realized that how much, you know, the social emotional part is related to that, especially around walking. I started to realize, I was like, she can walk. She just is faster crawling. And so by like rushing her to walk, like for me, like what message am I sending when really I want her to walk when she's ready and she feels that that's of interest to her. You know, I was confident in knowing that. I saw little like times where like she didn't realize she had let go and walked a few steps, you know, for one of them in particular. And so how do you think about how that relates?
In terms of like a child developing in that confidence piece, you mean?
Right.
You know,
of course, infants, like,
So early on, a lot of it is just typical progression, right? When a baby starts rolling, there's not much that is a conscious choice initially.
Right.
Sometimes they just find themselves in a different position.
Or like, you know, they're interested in a toy.
Yes,
and so you can have fun placing
all of a
the
sudden
toy.
they end up on their sides and then they do complete the role. Like initially it's some of that practice and then it becomes more purposeful. I find with walking exactly what you said, where there's often a confidence piece where they don't want to let go. Right. And so they're number one, they have another mode of transportation, as I call it. They can crawl around. So if they're crawling around and they're super fast or they're cruising or they can push a push walker and they're like, well, I have no need to let go yet. And I'm totally fine with this. And I like having that, you know, that extra support. That's all great. Sometimes there are times where I'll notice, you know, a certain positioning maybe where I'm like, you know, their hips need to be a little bit stronger. They're leaning forward too much, or they're locking out their knees. And those are the points where I say, you know what, if we give a little bit more stability, we're going to see that progression. Maybe baby doesn't actually feel so stable, and that's why they're not letting go. Yeah. There are other times where everything physiologically checks out, and it really is that confidence piece. And that's where I set up the environment in a way that helps them feel more confident. And so I'll say, you know, put 2 sturdy pieces of furniture, parallel to each other, a couch and a coffee table, 2 dining room chairs, whatever it is, and have that pivot back and forth and slowly move them apart. Okay. Yeah. And if they drop down to crawl, you've moved them too far. Move them back together. And then you're going to increase their confidence and then slowly, like inch by inch, move it apart so that you're building their confidence. You're building off of what they're capable of doing, what they feel comfortable doing. And then you're slowly setting up the environment in a way that's increasing their confidence. Or I'll say, you know what, position them with their back against a wall or the couch and just play with them. Pass a ball back and forth. Do something where now their hands are free, right? They're not holding on to something, and you're giving them a snack. You're doing something like that with them, but their hands are free. So they're getting comfortable in a position where they feel supported because their back is against something, but now their hands are free. And so we're challenging them to something new, but still working within their comfort zone. And so that's what we can do in different ways so that we're building off of what they have and then taking them to the next level.
I love that. And that's sort of what I was hoping to get at, that are there things that we can do, number one, to build that confidence when we realize it is about that? And number two, you talked about walkers. Do you feel that there's things that hinder confidence? I am biased and feel that walkers do, because I think, in just using the example that you gave, that when they have a mode of getting around walking with a contraption like that, how can we build confidence that they can walk without that? And so I never introduce them. Obviously, I know I'm like more of an extreme and that there's like place for everything, for every type of family and parent. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like things like that can hinder confidence or make them less likely to believe that they can do things on their own?
I don't. So there's a difference I want to actually acknowledge. There's a difference between the walkers that they sit inside of that I am very against, because they're actually very dangerous. Babies can fall downstairs in them, and if they do flip over, they can't get themselves out. There's no way for them to protect their head. So I want to first say those baby walkers that you put your baby inside of
like
are
the saucers that move. Yeah.
Do not put your baby inside of that. And I'm very careful. I usually don't say that about most pieces of equipment. I think everything in moderation, but those I am absolutely against. They are dangerous. The other types of walkers, the push walkers, I am okay with because babies are using them. They have to use their own body weight to not fall too far forward. They also, have to use their own balance to turn and pivot directions. So I'm okay with everything other than those baby walkers that you put inside or other, specifically dangerous pieces of equipment. I'm okay with everything in moderation. I don't think most pieces of equipment hinder progression. And when babies are relying on something, again, there's usually a reason. Either physiologically, we need to work on some strengthening aspect that they're not comfortable, or there are other ways that we can work on that confidence and set up their environment in other ways that they're not always using that to move around, right? But specifically, any piece of equipment, I don't want any parents to feel like if I introduce something, they're not going to be able to move. No. They're going to be able to move. Like it's really part of a natural progression. And so I am okay with push walkers, but I also will say no piece of equipment is going to make sure your baby meets a milestone. Right.
So that was more why I was didn't introduce it. I was like, I don't feel
you don't need it. You don't need it. You
I knew it wasn't like going to be like unlocking.
Exactly.
Something.
It is not unlocking anything. And so any parent that's like, oh my gosh, I have to go out and buy all these things because otherwise maybe no.
Like I'm in a city, like to me is like the less the better.
Less the better. And I had my twins when I was living in the city and you have limited space. Right. You have to cut it down. And so you do not need any piece of equipment to make sure your baby meets any milestone. Open floor is actually the best, and you can use what you have, anything. And that's why I say use a snack, use a little something. Babies like spoons and forks and don't use forks. They can poke themselves, but like a spoon or a remote control.
But I love using kitchen utensils as toys that are safe.
Want to make as much noise with your pots and pans as they possibly can. Yeah. Like you can use what you have already. You do not need to go buy any pieces of equipment.
Yes, I'm so aligned with that. We're speaking of these specific milestones. And so for listeners who are out of this, I appreciate you listening, but I think it's really helpful because I think it stands for a lot more. What are your thoughts on tummy time? Like I similarly feel that it wasn't necessarily strengthening or moving anything faster, but was just getting them used to being in a position. What are your thoughts on that?
So I will say tummy time, it's important for several reasons and is not the be all end all, right? So tummy time, and there are ways to make it more comfortable for babies who are struggling with it, okay? So I get this question all the time. My answer is always, there's no specific amount of time that I'm going to tell you that is the key to future success, okay, for your baby. It's not like that, okay? The reason we want babies to be on their tummies is for a few reasons. One is they are getting a lot of sensory input. So when our babies are born, they don't have a sense of where their bodies are in space. They come out of, in utero and they're all cocooned in there and they have a lot of tight pressure around themselves that's giving a lot of feedback about where they are. Okay. All of a sudden they're open and their arms and legs are flailing and they're like, where am I? Right. And like, if you were in a dark tunnel, what are you going to do? You're going to reach out to the wall and see where you are because you don't know where you are and what's around you. Okay. And so when babies are on their backs, their limbs are flailing. Okay. And they're not getting any external input about where their body is in space. So when we put them on their bellies, they are getting all that great sensory input of like, oh, that's where my hands are. That's where my shoulders are. That's where my hips are. And it's a calming experience to feel where your body is in space, right? And so that's number one. We want to start developing that sensory input that is actually really important for the future of where is my body in space for kids that don't have that sense, that proprioceptive sense, that's what we call it, the proprioceptive
like the feedback
sense
from
body awareness. Those are the kids in kindergarten who are constantly bumping into things. They are the ones that are their hands are running down the wall, every bulletin board and touching every single thing because they're looking for that external feedback of where is my body in space. They don't have a great sense of personal space. They are, bumping into the block tower. Okay. And so not that tummy time is going
I
to
was gonna say,
prevent that. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking what is this sensory
it's like an
experience that I'm
early
talking about?
proprioceptive experience.
Correct. So this is an earlier proprioceptive experience that we're giving input into the body that develops over many years. So there are a few things, right? So that's one of the things that I don't think is talked about enough of why is tummy time
and
important.
how important proprioceptive
Correct.
movement
And so
feedback and input is.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that's why I want to make this distinction of like why am I into tummy time?
Yeah.
So yes, it is important for head and neck development, right? Being able to support your head and lifting up. Absolutely. Okay. And so, but not all babies can do that from day one. And so why are you even putting your baby on their tummy, right? And so, yes, it is important for neck strengthening. We want babies to be able to lift their head against gravity. That is super important. And also for this sensory experience, right? And so what you can do for babies that are struggling with it is you can lay your baby on your chest. Right. That is tummy time.
That's more
they
how
are
I
getting all that sensory experience that I'm talking about. They're feeling the rise and fall of your chest. They're feeling where their body is in space. And they might lift their head up a little bit against gravity, right? And so the other thing that's also important to note about tummy time is babies who are struggling with this, there is the difference of like, wow, I don't like it, versus really screaming in pain. Okay. And for those babies who are really screaming in tummy time, that's an indication that there is reflux. There's something wrong. We need to figure out why, because if babies aren't ever comfortable on their tummies, well, then it's going to be hard to put them on their bellies to learn how to roll, to learn how to crawl. It's more of an indicator also of like, my baby always hates tummy time. That's also something to go and look into. Yes, for the experience of tummy time, but also why is your baby hating it so much consistently? If your baby can tolerate 30 seconds, a few minutes, you can do that. You can change the angle, right? You can put your baby on your chest. But if your baby is always struggling with belly down time, that's something to speak to your pediatrician about.
But it's less about like training, right?
It's
more about like giving them other ways of being besides on their back, in a car seat, on the floor, in the crib, like changing that positioning and getting them used to and accustomed to that. I only want to point that out because I did more of the tummy time on my belly, you know, like you described, or even on the changing table, turning them over and like they would be like playing with a diaper or something. Like there was, instead of this like allocated like thing on the checklist that I feel like can be a little bit fear mongering or,
100%.
you know, like torturous.
And when you
for
have one baby or 8 babies, okay, whatever number baby you have, it is overwhelming when you are starting off with a new baby, you're figuring out your schedule, and you're like, all of a sudden it's 5 o'clock and you didn't do any tummy time.
Right. And that's okay.
So 100%. So there are a few things that you can think about. Number one is what you just said is every diaper change, turn your baby onto their belly for a few minutes, right? And all of a sudden you have a tummy time session. So it doesn't have to be this block of a half an hour, right? Because that's, who finds a half an hour where you're not feeding and changing and sleeping and, you know, doing laundry and unloading your dishwasher, and running errands, all those different things, okay? Very hard to find that time. And so if you put your mind to like, okay, at every diaper change, my baby's going to get a few minutes of tummy time, all that adds up, okay? This isn't like an intense aerobic workout class at your gym that baby has to participate in for 45 minutes, okay? That's not what we need to do. So that's number one. Number two is just keeping in mind the containers, which is actually, you mentioned a little bit of that car seat time. And so I will bring that up a little bit. Stroller. So there's this concept of container baby syndrome, which is not a real syndrome, okay? But it's when babies are spending too much time in what we call containers, right? They're going from the car seat to the swing, to the bouncy seat, to the stroller, back to the car seat, and they're positioned in containers that don't allow for a lot of movement. And so when we say tummy time is important, what we're actually looking for is baby to be able to move freely through space. Babies are born with what we call primitive reflexes. If you see your baby like flailing in midair and they're all of a sudden they feel like they're falling, right? These are reflexes that babies are born with. Actually, they're survival mechanisms that babies are born with. And when babies move and have that open free play movement, they can integrate those reflexes. Movement becomes more purposeful. And if babies aren't allowed to have a lot of that open movement time, it's harder for them to learn how to control their movements, produce purposeful movements and then move through that milestone progression. And so there's nothing wrong with having your baby in a car seat. I use swings myself. I push my baby in a stroller all the time. But keeping in mind, balancing that out with open floor time so that babies are getting the sensory experience, babies are getting the strengthening experience, and they're learning how to integrate those reflexes and become more purposeful with their movements. That's all important. And that's what that floor time play is so important for, and just keeping that in mind.
I'm even thinking about, like, it's why we offer some of the classes we do at Union Square Play. Like, we have a developmental movement teacher who's incredible, and she uses these large fitness balls, and you put your baby on their belly on the fitness ball and roll them around. Like, I just think there's more pleasurable ways to do it if your baby isn't into certain elements of things like tummy time or some of the other things that your pediatrician might tell you to do. And on that note, I'm also a believer in not putting your baby in positions that they can't get in and out of on their own. Again, definitely like a different philosophy. Oh, how do you feel about that?
So there are those
of course,
two different camps. Everything in moderation, right? So there's no like you're doing harm to your baby. Like don't put them on like a big kid swing when they're 4 months old. Obviously, that goes
But
outside.
For using the sitting example, like I just don't feel a purpose in placing them in a sitting position. They can't get out of that, can't get in it.
Sitting is actually, it's become a controversial milestone. And I'm not sure why. Well, actually, I take that back. I do know why. I believe there's been more recent, when my babies were young, baby-led weaning wasn't a thing. Okay, that's when babies are self-feeding. Okay, and
it became a thing. Like
it became a thing. Okay,
a parent.
Right, and so this was not a thing 14 years ago. Everything changes, right? And there's going to be something in the future that parents today aren't even aware of, right? And so baby-led weaning became a thing in recent years, and that's when babies are feeding themselves on their own, and we're putting more food on their high chair, and they can feed themselves. And there is much more of a criteria that babies need to be sitting on their own before you introduce food. All right, and so this is where I think the big question comes in, and the rush. Okay, and so I want to tell parents that there isn't anything wrong with a baby being put into sitting. I will get those questions like, am I hurting my baby's spine? Is any position, if you sit your baby on your lap, they're not hurting their spine. So if you're putting your baby on the floor to sit, they're not hurting themselves. Okay. So that's like first and foremost, the question that I get all the time is that there's nothing wrong with your baby being in a seated position that they didn't get themselves into. They're not harming themselves.
Right. Okay? I more just feel like they're stuck there and it's not like doing anything productive, but just want to give that disclaimer.
Totally. Yeah. Exactly. And so this is where I think the question always comes in about sitting, is because the pediatrician will say at the 6-month visit, your baby's ready to start solids, but they're not sitting yet. And so the parent is left feeling very confused, like, well, what do I do? Okay. And so there are a few areas that we can go in this. Number one, I'll say is I'm not a feeding specialist. I'm not a speech therapist. I'm not in the world of feeding, but my perspective from a physiological standpoint is if your baby is sitting on your lap and they can physically hold themselves up and they're not falling over, and even if you place them on the floor and they're not flopping over, they can hold their head up well, they're probably okay to sit them in the high chair. It's really looking about head control, posture. Are they stable enough in a seated position that they're not, slumped over in the high chair? Okay, so that's number one. I just want to put that aside because that's where a lot of parents fear, and that rush to have them sitting by 6 months, which I actually said sitting is a 6 to 8 month milestone, and that's actually not getting themselves into sitting. That's just being able to sit up independently.
Right. And so like in a high chair also.
In a high chair,
to eat,
so we have to keep that in mind that not all babies are going to be sitting independently by 6 months when your pediatrician says that they're ready for solids. Yeah. Okay. So there's all this parent pressure of I need to, and also if you wait to start your baby on solids a few extra weeks, another month, they will also be great eaters, and there's nothing that's going to happen.
It probably will give you a little bit more time to not just be inundated with new things on the schedule.
And just to caveat also for a second, when my twins were preemies, they were 34 weekers. And so at 6 months, my pediatrician said, you're good to go with solids. Okay. I spoon fed because it wasn't a thing. And they were in the high chair. They were reclined in the high chair. Okay. And I was spoon feeding. it was a disaster when I first started. And I was like, what is wrong with my babies? They couldn't figure out how to take food off of a spoon. They were not developmentally ready for it. Okay.
I'd argue that like it can even take longer. They can be sitting up, they can be opening their mouth, and they can have a sensitivity to textures or a gag reflex that's still developing, and it all comes out. I mean, that was one of mine. I was like, why is she spitting out food for months?
Exactly. And I was like, what's wrong with my babies that they can't take food off of a spoon? And I was getting frustrated because my pediatrician told me to start solids.
Right.
And it was just baby food. It wasn't even, and they couldn't do it, and they weren't developmentally ready because my pediatrician was looking at it from a chronological standpoint.
Right. Just
gestationally,
they
were not ready. And we always have to remember, and I didn't even say this when I was talking about the milestone, those windows, is that if your baby is born premature, we adjust for gestational age. This is so, so, so important. We are looking at gestational age that for gross motor milestones, usually, that distinction peters out around 18 months. When babies start walking, that's when we can kind of say, okay, the 3 or 4 weeks that they were born early doesn't have as much significance as when we're looking at rolling, for example. Mm-hmm. But that matters,
especially in those early months.
And I should have waited, right? And I didn't know better at the time. And so there's no rush to do some of these things. Going back to your original question of, should babies get there on their own? Getting into and out of sitting is a much more complex skill.
Right.
So it requires crossing midline, which is crossing the center of the body, arm strength, pushing themselves up into that seated position. There's a lot more coordination that's involved in that for sure. And so I don't have a problem with babies being put in a seated position from a physiological standpoint. And a lot of times I find that getting in and out of sitting comes along with that crawling milestone. It's much closer to that. And the reason I don't have as much of a problem from a physiological standpoint, and again, I certainly know of the other school of thought, which is babies should get into positions on their own. And there's a lot to be said for that. I think a lot of times parents will feel like their babies get very frustrated when they're on their bellies, when they're on their backs,
crunching face.
And so then they'll end up putting them in some sort of container instead. And that's not necessarily helping with development either. So if your baby is comfortable in a seated position, is okay with that, I think it's totally fine as long as we're also giving them that belly time and their back time so that we're giving them those different experiences. If your baby is getting stuck in sitting and they are never trying to move, they can't rotate, that's actually a different sign that, something is going on, and we want to look at that as well.
Or I guess my thought process is when we put them in these positions, we can kind of skip over inadvertently some other things. We just talked about using sitting, that if we're just sitting them, you don't want to miss out on giving them opportunity for that floor time to be on the side, to cross the midline, all that stuff. So it's more just, giving those kind of statements to allow for the unfolding to happen.
Exactly.
So, but sitting in a high chair is totally different, and for eating and feeding and things like that. What are your thoughts on comparison culture? I think it's easy for us here to talk about how we had late, developers in certain areas physically. We also knew and had the confidence that, it would come. We looked for those micro milestones. We talked a little bit about how parents don't often know that. Did you, even with all of your knowledge, feel that comparison culture?
So interesting, because having twins, I always have a natural comparison, right? And so, and it happened to be that my twins did everything within a week of each other, which is so funny. Looking back, I'm like, how did that even happen?
Right.
So here's the thing.
Yeah, every baby's so different.
Every baby's so different. How did my twins do everything at that time? Not now, but at the time they did everything within a week. The comparison culture is so real and very, very stressful. And there's part of me that says, don't get worried about comparing your baby to others. And then there's also that part that says, but if we don't ever compare, you don't know if there's something your baby needs help with, right? Comparing means that it gives you information.
Or it should be used for that.
Should be used for gathering information. And that's what I would tell your audience to really think about is you're not going to be able to have blinders on, right? You can't be completely blind to what's out there, what your neighbor's baby's doing, what your niece or nephew's doing, what the other babies in daycare are doing, right? All the other babies in the daycare are moving up to the walking class and your baby is stuck in the crawling class because they aren't moving on yet. And you're like, but I want them to be with all their little baby friends, okay? Even though they'll make new friends in the crawling class. But it's a natural thing to compare.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to, that's okay to compare. Right? It's okay to look around at you. Like there's this other extreme of like, don't compare your baby. And like, it's okay to look around and say, what are same age babies doing?
Right.
Right? That's okay.
Or looking at your page as a resource and hearing from you what other babies are doing.
What are babies? And then we also, again, always have to look at the window. So if there is another baby crawling at 6 months and your baby is 8 months and not crawling, there's no worries there, okay? Because the 6-month-old's crawling, that's really advanced, okay? And again, it doesn't mean that they're going to be an Olympic athlete. It
right,
just
not
means,
even advanced. That's really
that's
fast
really
or
early.
Yeah.
And like, there and a baby who's walking at 9 or 10 months, yes, there are babies who do that. Most babies walk 13, 14 months. So a baby who walks at 9 months, like that's not even what we're striving for here. Like there's no benefit to walking that early. So just because your niece is walking at 9 months and your 12-month-old is not, there's no worries there at all. Okay. The reason that I say you're not going to have blinders on is, right, if your baby is sitting there doing nothing, right, not making any efforts to move, not showing that progression, not doing those things, well, oh, all these other babies are motivated to move. They're trying to move. Like my baby's just sitting there. And that's where sometimes parents will hear a lot of like the excuses of why their baby's not moving, right? My baby's too big to move. My baby is
They'll
in the 90th.
hear that from others?
Yeah. Yes. Like I either they'll think this themselves, the pediatrician will tell them, their neighbors will tell them, right? Your baby's too big to move, right? Your baby's too small to move. Your baby is just so entertained by all their big siblings. Your baby is an only child and only entertained by you, so they don't have to move. Like there could be any excuse of why your baby is not progressing, okay? And so that's where I'll say babies of all sizes meet their milestones within the typical timeframes. The 90th percentile will meet, and the less than 5 percentile will meet within those typical timeframes. Babies should be motivated to move. So all of those, whether they have 8 siblings, they're an only child, they're at home with a babysitter, they're in daycare, no matter what, they should all, they're neurologically wired to move through this progression naturally. Okay. And so if your baby isn't doing those things, then it's something to look into.
I love that line you just said. Can you say it again? They're neurologically wired.
Yes. To want to move. They are neurologically wired to want to move. I just want
people to hear that because, again, with like contraption culture, like, not in a fear-mongering way, but less is not always more necessarily. It's just, it's not needed. Like, anyway,
we want as much.
We think more toys. We need to, if they're not moving, we need to add more, entertain more.
I
honestly think like put them in front of a window, maybe like allow them to see the shadows. Anyway,
all of those things. And I say the best thing that you could buy your baby is a playpen. If you are, if you want to keep your baby contained, right? Maybe you have dogs, maybe the big siblings.
Open space.
You want the open space to move, and the pots and pans, the spoons, they're going to be the best motivators for your baby to use and play with. You want to add in toys there, that's great. They usually find the thing that's not the toy anyway, and it doesn't really matter.
And there's so many, I'm sorry to digress. There's so many amazing ways that you can allow for that. Like make a cabinet in the kitchen that's safe on the floor for them. Instead of, it doesn't need to be in front of them. What motivation is that to be like, oh, mommy's in the kitchen and here's my cabinet I can open on my own. I can like
something with all the Tupperwares
while I'm
at the bottom, so that it's like safe and you have some measuring spoons in there, you have some Tupperware and a wooden spoon or something like that, and like they're gonna have the best time.
You're reminding me of just like the magic of when I used to be more of a resource for infants and toddlers because I was going through it. Obviously I still have all the other ways that I'm with the infant toddler world, but it's just there's so many things that you could do to kind of alleviate that fear and anxiety and comparison just within your home by,
Exactly.
maximizing.
Just maximize what you have. You never have to go and buy things. Your baby doesn't need much. It's really the open play experience and letting your baby move through different positions, be in different positions. That's what's going to be the biggest gift you can give your baby.
Yeah. I didn't mean to sidetrack
No.
you from the comparison thing. I just also remember so much. So again, just giving that disclaimer that I went into motherhood really like having what I thought was such confidence in all the things we're talking about today. And then going to those early classes when my baby was 3-4 months, knowing I'm really here because I needed to get out of the house. I know that like my baby's not like, absorbing through osmosis how to sing this song, but it's really for me to be with these other moms. But I quickly saw how that wasn't necessarily the case for these other moms who, some of which are like my best friends to this day. It's just, you don't know. Like you go thinking I'm in a baby class, and of course I own Union Square Play, so I hope I don't perpetuate this with that, but I'm in a baby class, so it must be that we're measuring up what they're doing and comparing and what they're getting out of this. Truth be told, Union Square Play was developed because I needed a place to go, and I felt I wanted to allow for open space. So I just want parents to that's what I believe early classes are. But I would go to those classes and quickly realize I was comparing. Oh, that baby's looking and noticing the bubbles. My baby's not. Like, I really vividly remember that. Do you? And what are your thoughts on like classes and things like that?
I went to classes. I went to several classes, and for the exact reason that you said, which is I needed to get out of the house. And it's a great experience when your kid is enjoying it and participating. And then sometimes you have the child that like wants nothing to do with the class. And you're like, why are all these other babies looking and shaking the shakers?
Or the baby's not noticing, is like falling asleep.
Yes. And they're running away because all they want to do is go play on this stuff. Like I went to, they used to have Gymboree. I don't think it exists anymore. I'm not even sure. And I remember bringing my twins, and I actually had a miserable experience because a lot of the classes you needed to have a second adult. Like it had to be 1-to-1. I didn't have anyone to come with me. I had to like hire a babysitter to come with me.
It's such a shame.
It was really hard. But I do remember specifically with my twins more than my other two, they weren't interested in participating.
Were they your oldest?
They were my oldest. So like that was my first. I felt like everything, because they were 6 weeks early, everything felt delayed with them. Like everything was, they weren't on the early end.
Were you already a PT?
I was a PT, but I was working for like a year and a half and only with like older kids at that time. So I knew, and I had very little baby education in PT school, like almost nothing. And so I knew very little about baby development. And even watching them like socially, like we went to this Gymboree class, I remember, and like the instructor was doing some songs and some things. They wanted nothing to do with it. They just wanted to go run and play on all the equipment. And I was like hustling them back. And I'm like, I remember being like embarrassed. Like my kids I can't even remember how old they were at the time. They wanted nothing to do with the class. And I was like why?
Right. Why does that make you feel that way? It's like, why are we expecting kids, infants, toddlers, preschoolers to like participate in something that we've chosen for them?
And like
we don't know their interests yet. They don't necessarily. And we're just like, if you're not interested in what everyone else is interested in, something's wrong.
And I felt I remember feeling like embarrassed. Like,
of course,
my toddlers, what were they, 16 months, 17 months at the time, whatever it was, like were crawling over to the side.
And maybe they were the only ones.
Yeah. And they probably were, and it's a very hard thing when you're watching everybody else. And that's not even like a milestone, right? That you're like, look, it's the social piece, the engagement piece. And then you go into this rabbit hole of thinking like, is my child not engaged socially? Are they not understanding the directions? Are they not?
Right.
And
my God. From such an early age.
Yes, from such an early age. And like, it's, you said it right, which is we chose that environment. And it's a lot of that. Like we need the socialization, but what's the socialization? It's not just like mommy play groups and, just free for all. It's like this structured experience that our children are supposed to perform in a certain way.
Right.
And they're not. And so now we feel like failures as a parent.
And especially early on. I mean, the point is that you're taking them to these classes because they're not at the point yet for a classroom setting, right? Like we work toward everyone being able to basically like figure out how to be in a group.
Yes.
We offer like early classes where it's mostly just child-led play. And then there's a tiny part at the end where we sit at a table and the kids can come get a snack. And parents are like, oh, it's snack time, it's reading time. And I'm always like, they'll come, they see I'm doing it. Like, they'll be motivated if they're hungry and want to participate. I think it holds so much more weight that way.
Yeah. And that's so good of you as an instructor, because sometimes you feel the instructor is like disappointed in you as a parent for not bringing your kid over to participate, right?
I give that, of course. And that's not for every type of class.
Yeah.
Of course, there's like classes where that can't flow, but I just meant it's like what like the basis and foundation of why I created classes that way, because I felt like that was missing. Most people who come to those specific classes that we offer are like, I can't tell you, they were parents like you. Like, I went to that music class that everyone's obsessed with. That's amazing. But my kids just wanted to run around or move or like explore the little like outlet.
Yep.
Like they, and so being able to offer things that they can explore safely, not necessarily all navigating in a group or all sitting in a lap, like being able to move.
Yes.
And it leads me to like the next area that I'd love to get into that I've been thinking so much about recently is these mixed messages we give our kids. I mean, take that class as an example. It's like, we want you to move. We want you to walk around. We want you to walk. I mean, crawl, all the things, go, rush, faster. I'm not saying you did that. I'm saying
totally
generally. And then we take them to a class like that. And it's like, no, you have to sit in my lap.
Yeah.
You have to sit right here and just watch. And there's times as they get older also, like, thinking about like the comparison thing, like we so badly, as they get older, we know from experience, don't want our kids to look outside themselves to compare. And then we do things like take them to a birthday party and they're like, look, everyone's playing, go play. I mean, there's so many.
I had that experience
I could
so
go
many
on
times.
and on. I like listed them because I've just realized even like self-reflectively times. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like to put babies from an early age in positions or rush them, because it's like, why are we asking more of them?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's all the time. Of course, like I love PTs who like, have a low table and put them on their knees. And I love all that. We're not like asking them, we're offering, right? And I think I can already know that you do that. What can you elaborate on that a little bit in what you do as a practice, like how you might offer positions versus when we have to ask more of kids, both in your own parenting and professional life?
Sure. And I think it's, for every age you can do this, which is certainly for babies when we're trying to help them and move them along.
Of course. And they are babies.
Exactly.
We have to
it's really about setting up the environment that we talked about, right? It's setting up the environment in a way that they can go and explore on their own. They are, it's about setting up those experiences for them. And I think even as we get older, it's so true. You said even about the birthday parties, like everybody else is participating. Everybody else is going and doing something, and your kid is clinging to your leg,
and
or
it's
like
a projection of what we're feeling.
Yes,
that we're saying that to them.
I even remember, and like this, it really circles back to the beginning when I said, as a parent, I look back and there's so many moments that I can do differently.
Same.
And every single parent is going to feel like that down the road, right? I even remember my daughter. It was a 3-year-old class, and they were doing some performance, and she was a very good kid, very well behaved, always participated, whatever. She had a bad day that day and did not. She was the center person in the performance on the stage. She stood there with a frown on her face, with her head tilted to the side, like growling. And again, I embarrassed to say this now, but I was so embarrassed at the time. Like,
I've been there.
And I was like, okay, I'm not going to look at her. And now looking back, I'm like, she was 3 years old. Why couldn't I just smile at her or take her off the stage?
And like it would be a funny memory.
And it's a funny memory. And now for me, I look back and I'm like, what? Why?
Well, we learn, and
you live and learn.
Yes. And I'm glad we're saying this because we're not preaching. We've both been in those positions.
I've been there so many times, over and over and over again. And I think it is this mixed message where it's, yes, let's encourage them, all this play and these experiences, and we want to take our kids to all these experiences, right? We want to sign our kid up for soccer. We want to sign them up for gymnastics, and then they get there and they don't want to participate. They run away. They cry. They don't want to do it. And you're like, but I wanted you to have this great soccer experience, to move your body and to, great. And your kid is 4 years old and they don't want to play soccer, and they're intimidated, and they, and we're so nervous that it means something for the future. And it doesn't. My daughter, who didn't participate in that 3-year-old play, and so she just went off to sleepaway camp for 4 weeks, and she has a ton of friends.
Oh my God,
and
I'm so glad that you're saying
you
that.
know, it's again, that's where I could say hindsight is always 20/20.
Yes.
Right? Where I can look back now as a parent, and I even can say this professionally as well. There are times, before I had kids, I really thought to myself, well, if I do things a certain way, or I would look at the child. I remember I worked in a school setting for, and I would look at the kid that came in pajamas one day, and I'm like, really?
Oh
they
my
couldn't.
God.
Why are they in pajamas?
We've
this parent
become
couldn't.
these people we used to judge sometimes as educators.
I look back and I distinctly remember this child in pajamas was she in pre-K, and really she couldn't get dressed this morning. What? Why?
And what empathy you have now, right? I remember me and my teachers being like, oh, he came in the pajamas again. Or the baby, and when I was in daycare, that would show up in the wet diaper still.
Yes.
How much we would judge. And it's like, clearly that parent had a really bad morning.
Yes.
And really, thank God we could be here is what I want to go back and say. But I mean, I love all this. I just think that in my mind that there's this 0 to 7 age, and we could argue the importance of 0 to 1, 1 to 2, whatever. But I do believe there's so much wiring that happens then. And for me, going into parenting, fresh off of the belief in natural gross motor development for so many reasons, I really also at the forefront was how do I want to wire my baby? Of course, I don't think that saying clap your hands is going to make them be a people pleaser and only do it for me, or make them believe that I'm always asking more of them. But I do think it's sort of a slippery slope of always asking of babies from the start. When we're thinking of milestones, because of course we want them to reach them.
Yep.
We also want signs of life, right? You're becoming more of a present human being, not a blob. And the comparison thing. So you for a living have to somewhat ask more of babies, right?
Yes.
It's your duty.
And children and all of that. And this is it is a really tough.
What are the ages that you?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work in a school. I used to work in a sensory gym. Now really I'm concentrating on babies, but I've worked with the whole progression, right? And again, my own kids. I think, listen, it is very hard. And so sometimes when I'm specifically working with a child who is struggling.
Yes,
there's a distinction between I have to encourage positions that a child who is struggling and can't get there on their own. And now I am working through those difficult things to get them to where they need to be. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
There's that piece, right? If your baby needs physical therapy,
yes, extra support.
I do put babies in positions that they are uncomfortable with because we have to, because they're not doing it on their own.
Yes.
Right.
And they should be. We are asking more of them because we want to build in them that they can reach those.
Exactly.
With the right. Yeah.
100%. So there is that distinction, right?
Yes.
Children who can't do it, we have to
help them
facilitate it. And do things that they can't do on their own. And that's okay, right? And so you have to find a provider that you trust, that you think is doing the right thing, that what even if you're not educated in this area specifically yourself, you're like, okay, my baby looks okay. Or, the provider is explaining why we're doing these certain positions and your baby is.
And has the energy that you
exactly,
have.
Right? And we're okay. And so there's that element, right? Which is different.
Right.
Okay. Then there's everything's progressing and you're right. There's also this mixed messaging of we want all this open free play, but be careful and stop and don't move and sit and all these things. And so I think that, it's a challenging thing in your own mind to let encourage your baby to move through their environment on their own, set up the environment in a way that they can engage in the best way on their own. And I think that one of the things that I'm a big advocate for risky play as children get older.
We can talk about that.
Absolutely. I'm a big advocate that that children should be taking risks. Now, that doesn't mean running into the street with a moving car, right? There's risk within reason that you as the adult can monitor and make sure that your child is doing.
Tell us what your thoughts are. And on baby proofing.
So risky play is so important for children to learn how to trust their own bodies. Where do we learn to trust ourselves? Everything's from the physical first, right? So if you want your child to later on trust their own instincts, trust their own, everything else that they're going to experience in the social emotional realm, everything starts with physical first.
Yes.
And so we want our children to start off from baby age through toddlers and beyond, trusting themselves physically, because that's, again, their first natural experience in the world.
Yes.
Okay. And so allowing them to take safe risks is really, really important. And that starts from when babies are rolling around on the floor and they get stuck under a chair or a couch. Don't jump in and help them right away. Let them figure it out. Now, maybe they're going to need your help, right? Because they can't get themselves
but there's
out.
other ways to respond. Like, I see you,
I see you, right? Or let them, stay there for a second and figure it out and see if they can problem solve on their own. We want them to develop problem solving skills so that when they get to kindergarten, they can problem solve. It starts from the physical first,
yes.
okay?
And
trusting
in, like, what
themselves.
They're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when it comes to baby proofing, obviously we need to protect them from the oven. We need to protect them from the stairs if they can't do stairs yet, right? But set up that open environment, right? That they can navigate around freely while you're really cordoning off the dangerous areas. And then when they can learn stairs, teach them the stairs, right? It's something that they should be exposed to. And we can, again, risky play is really good. Encouraging them. Some people don't want any coffee table in the room because they don't want their baby pulling to stand on anything, or they don't want them, going outside to a park near a swing, right? We want to encourage experiences that they can navigate through, that they can problem solve through, so that they start trusting themselves from an early age. Again, everything starts with the physical first.
Yes, I love that so much. And using your example in the beginning of those kids that you see that are kind of bumping into things, I think you could also say that when you haven't allowed them to have this open world, you might see other signs of like, fear and things like that, and not having trust in their own bodies. I love this topic so much. I think this is the first time that I just kind of let it run wild because I'm so engaged and interested with all that you have to say on this topic in particular. Since there's so much, can you tell people where they can find you for more? And also leave us with something that you wish every mom who's not yet a mom would know in this area.
Absolutely. So firstly, you can find me on my website, totsontarget.com. And I'm on all the social media channels, Tots on Target. My biggest one is on Instagram. And that's where I share a lot of the educational, but YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, all the places, Tots on Target. And one of the things that I really want to leave parents with is you know your baby best. Trust yourself as a parent. You are going to make mistakes, just as I did along the way. That's okay. It's part of your growth as a parent, but also learning to trust yourself. Because I think when we become parents, we don't have that experience behind us. We don't trust ourselves. And that's something that I want to leave you with, which is develop that confidence. It's okay if you don't have that fully in the beginning, but you're going to develop, trust your gut, and ask all the questions that you need to. You are your child's best advocate. That is who is going to look out for your child's best interest. So you can ask, but at the end of the day, it's your gut that matters the most.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening.